if a slim person says something like that to me, like, oh my God, I feel disgusting. Like, I've put on so much weight over lockdown, and I'm like, well, if you think you're disgusting, what must you think about me? I must be, circus freak horrific levels in your mind. I know intellectually that that's not the case, but that is the message that you're putting out there.
Hello and welcome back to the Mothership, Ireland's very first parenting panel show brought to you by HerFamily.ie. I'm Laura Cunningham, and every week we'll be bringing the issues that matter most to Irish families to the table. On this week's episode, we're talking about body image and raising kids that love and accept themselves. Of course, body image issues very often start at home. So how do we as parents make sure that we break that cycle and raise kids that love themselves and have a really healthy relationship with food? On this week's panel, we have Jennings from BodyWhys. We have podcaster and body positivity activist Michelle McCormick.
Hi.
And dietitian Sarah Keogh. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So it's almost Christmas, as we all know. And that means many things, but one of them is that things are about to change in a big way. And by that I mean, come 2 weeks' time, everything in the shops is going to change. It's going to go from piles of sweets and chocolate to exercise gear. And every ad on the radio is going to be for gyms and for slimming groups and all that sort of stuff. It happens every single year. And unfortunately, it kind of reflects and probably, influences the way a lot of us think about food and our bodies. It's all, excess and enjoying ourselves and fun or restriction, and that's good and we're well behaved and all that. It's kind of ingrained in us now at this stage, isn't it? And as we know, that very much kind of starts from a young age often. So Ellen, I'm going to go to you first. Why do we start questioning ourselves and our bodies at such a young age?
When you're growing up and in your adolescent years, there's a lot of change happening in your life. There's, I suppose, a lot going on at school, maybe within the home. There might be different events that are happening in the person's life growing up in terms of puberty, and all these changes can kind of change the way we think and feel about ourselves and our body. And when you think about body image, there's lots of different factors that contribute to that. And I suppose when you think about that time, the person is developing the way they feel about themselves and their body. And we would often say in eating disorders, like if you think back to the time in your life when this all started for you, and kind of think through a timeline, oftentimes in adolescence we'll find that eating disorders can occur around that age. Now they can occur at anyone at any stage in their life, but we do find that those messages kind of from home and things like that can have a huge impact.
And as parents, what are maybe some of the common mistakes we're making? Is there language that we're using that's not helping?
I suppose the first thing to say is not to kind of blame yourself or think that like the way you've been speaking is, all or nothing going to impact your child's body image, because there's lots of other factors that are going to contribute as well. But there are some ways, I suppose, that you can try to mitigate spreading on kind of any internalized messages that you've it's about kind of how you speak to yourself, I suppose, in a way, and coming back to that self-compassion for yourself and being a role model for your children to kind of showcase like this is what you can do to support yourself and give yourself the confidence to live in the body that you have and accept your body the way it is.
That's it. I mean, if we all give out about parts of ourselves in front of our children, how are they supposed to think any differently?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's really important to be aware of your kind of language around that and the messaging that you're sending to your children, but also not to beat yourself up about the way you might have spoken about your body in the past, and kind of learn from that and open the conversation and speak openly about body diversity and accepting yourself and being compassionate towards yourself, and teach your children the skills to cope with that throughout their life. So
because like you said, there is a slight shift in mindset. Diet culture was just absolutely accepted. It was nearly part of pop culture when I was growing up, whereas people are starting to question that a little bit more now, which is great. So I like that ethos of not giving out to yourself too much, because it's all we knew, but I suppose we know better now, so we'll try and do better as such. So absolutely. Sarah, I'm going to go to you, because obviously food is a huge part of this. I mean, it's not the be all and end all when it comes to body positivity, but it plays a huge part of it. So how do we at home reframe food? Because food starts at home from very early, from weaning stages up to like family food all throughout our adolescence. So what do we need to know about, introducing and framing food for our kids from a young age?
I mean, I think the thing I see so often is we put so many rules and regulations and restrictions. And the first thing I would say straight away is you have to stop talking about foods as good and bad.
Okay.
And if I could just get people there's no good food, there's no bad food, there's just food. And I think we make this huge drama out of it. And, you can have this and you have this and this amount and it's all the rest. And I know we talk about new sort of nutrition guidelines, and we do need to have, the foods that are going to give us the iron and the foods that are going to give us the, the fiber and all the rest. But I think how we look at foods, how we present them, we just have to make it normal. That there's you can't have dessert because you've been bad, or you can have dessert because you've been good. And then we associate those as being good and bad and well-behaved and not. And I think we have to take that whole judgment. And I suppose I spent a lot of time kind of going, it's just food. Like it is just food. And it's okay. And yes, we want healthy habits, but we don't need to talk about food all the time to have healthy habits. As parents, you can lead by just doing, by just having the sort of the food that's there that, we kind of want them to have in terms of getting their nutrition right, but we don't need to talk about it all the time. And I'd say important. In the same way we don't go around, God, you breathed really well today. Fantastic. You eat, you breathe, you do a little bit of exercise, but you don't have to go to the kids, oh, we are now going to exercise. It's like, of course we're going for a walk, because that's just normal behavior.
Okay.
And it is, as you said, it's what's normal. When we were kids, dieting was normal. There's very few people I know that didn't have at least one parent who was dieting almost constantly. So that was normal. And it's just to step back. It's just food. Take the judgment out of it. Just do the normal thing and stop talking about it.
So my son is 18 months, so I've just come out of the whole sort of trying to get it now. I've been very lucky. He's a very good grubber. But I know lots of parents struggle a lot with that, because they have this guilt around, is my child eating the right amount? So we're reading all sorts about, what they should and shouldn't have. And I'm sure a lot of the stuff probably starts from that, because we're so concerned about making sure that we're getting it right. That has to be transferring over onto our kids.
Well, there's huge panic. And I think we've nearly gone from having like adults worried about diet, and now we have to really worry about children's diets.
Yeah.
And yes, we have to look at nutrition. And I know as a dietitian, you're looking at iron levels and brain development and all of those things. And yes, they're incredibly important. But I'm seeing parents terrified their child is going to starve to death. And they're constantly feeding them, constantly giving them food. And then there's the whole Instagram one-upmanship, my child ate avocado and your child is only eating something out of a jar and I cooked it. And, and there's that whole, I suppose, competitive nearly aspect with it. And I think people are under pressure to have these amazing meals and to cook all of this. And I think just eat. It's just food. If they get a little bit of everything, you're just trying to get a bit of variety in. And again, I think it's taking the pressure off yourself as well. You don't have to impress the whole world with what your child eats. I often laugh, if you saw what one of my kids goes to school with for lunch, I'm sure the teachers are wondering, is his mother actually a dietitian? But this is the one thing he eats in school, and that's okay. And I really don't lose sleep over it, and he's fine. And you've got to look at the whole picture with it. And I do think we just have this whole perfectionism around food all the time. And I know it is quite funny if you get a lot of dietitians together, like we eat chocolate and drink wine, and no, not constantly, but it's I know, it's shocking. And people do, they're like, and I used to work in hospitals, and you'd sit down for lunch, and if there was a new member of staff, they'd nearly cover, and you're like, I really don't care. And I'm not judging. And I think you'll find nearly dietitians are the least judgy, because you know it's okay. So I think we need to take that pressure and that impressing, and I'm on this special diet and all of that with it.
Talking about babies is really interesting, because we have this shift from, when a baby is small, it's all about, oh my God, a gorgeous chubby baby, look at the chunk, look at the rolls, you're a beautiful fat baby, and it's all about putting on, regaining their birth weight and XYZ. And where does that shift happen between, look at your beautiful chunky chubby toddler, and oh, your child is now a victim of childhood obesity? It happens somewhere. Where does it happen, and why does it happen? And even with food and eating, as Sarah says, babies are natural intuitive eaters. If they're breastfed or bottle fed or whatever way they're fed, they eat till they're full and then they stop. And it is society that drives that instinct out of us.
Absolutely.
And it's been driven out of all of us in our generation. I hope that in future generations, we will maybe retain some of that instinctive knowing when we're hungry, knowing when we're full, and just allowing ourselves to eat in a more natural way. Because it is an instinct, like breathing, it's instinctive in us, and we don't actually have to try and control so heavily this bodily function that our body will just do by itself if we let it.
So we all need to just chill out a little bit is the message, is it?
And I think you have a very good point there, because I think the big thing is forcing children to clear their plate.
Okay, well, that was certainly the way in my house. You weren't moving until it was done.
Absolutely, it was. You have to finish everything, and as you said, it's just you children are born. Not everybody, but pretty much everyone is born with this lovely instinct. I'm feeling full. That's enough. But we have. Well, I've put it out on the plate, and this is the portion. And I do a lot of work on portion sizes for kids. And you're trying to go actually a little tummy. Their tummies aren't much bigger than their fist. If they've had enough, just trust that. And I think the other thing I'm seeing all the time is this constant snacking. This idea that if the child gets hungry, it's going to be a catastrophe, but it's actually okay. They need a little bit of break with that. And again, the constant feeding them, you're teaching them that they have to constantly eat. And then later on they're going, oh, well, now I'm constantly eating, so that's bad. And now I have to stop. And then you have fasting. And, I think it's just, as you said, let the natural kind of instinct. There's a reason we sort of have 3 meals a day. And we don't need to clear the plate every time we sit down.
And as we know, regardless of what way you try and control it or not, no matter what they eat or don't eat, people are just different shapes and sizes, and that goes for kids as well. So, you never want them to feel like, oh, I did too much of that and that's why I'm like this. Or people just are different. And we're seeing a big change, and hopefully it'll continue, that people are starting to accept, that it's not a one-size-fits-all world. Yeah. Michelle, are you seeing a change, and is that seeping down at all into kids?
There has been a change, and it is mostly for adults and mostly in the media when we see social media, but it's all about what you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
So there has been a beginning of change, but as with all sort of social movements, the move towards body acceptance, or fat acceptance as I would call it, has been quite slow, and then it has also been co-opted by the mainstream media to turn it into the same message that it was before. So body positivity has been turned on its head, and almost now any body positivity post you come across online is very ingrained with all of this. Well, as as long as you're healthy. And, body positivity is one thing, but, this person is obese. Or, if you look at even adverts like Nike bringing plus size mannequins into their stores, there was a huge backlash saying you can't represent this. This is glorifying obesity. And it's sort of like, okay, so you want fat people to work out so that they can lose weight and be thin. What is it that we are to wear if the clothing providers are not making the plus size clothes,
and can we not
can we not go into the shop and buy those things? So it's very it's still very rocky, and the messages are very confusing. I think for them to, and I don't think that's really benefiting children right now, because parents even are still so confused about what's okay and what's not okay. And one really hard line that I see is even the use of the word fat. I've had conversations about this over and over again. Parents, even with the best will in the world, when their child comes to them and says, oh, mummy, such and such called me fat, your instinct is to say, oh my gosh, no, you're not fat, you're beautiful. But that is reinforcing the message that fat is bad. And of course, you don't want your children to go around saying you're fat, that's fat, because you don't know how that person will receive it. So it's really, really tough, tricky line to walk between having your children understand that it's okay for people to come in all shapes and sizes of bodies, but also having them navigate a fat-phobic world in a way that is still kind to others. And I definitely think that one of the main things that we can do is really take the power out of that word fat and stop viewing it as an insult, stop viewing it as a negative, as something to be thrown around as an insult to people, and start regarding it as a neutral descriptor, like tall, like brunette, and really sort of reclaim that.
I'm always slightly wary about using the word because, I don't want to insult anyone in a, attempt to appear like switched on and woke. But for kids also, if we tell them that it's okay to use the word fat, is there a danger then that they're going to hurt a child in their class?
Exactly. It's really difficult even for adults to know when it's okay to say a word that is still in the process of being reclaimed. So if we think about particularly the word queer, there was a time when that was in that same phase where it was being reclaimed by LGBTQ plus activists, and it was for use pretty much solely by activists. Now we understand the word to mean everybody under the LGBTQ plus. Umbrella, and it's easier to just say queer, and now we all just say it, and it's a very accepted neutral word. So we're still on that journey with the word fat, and hopefully we will get there. But for now, I think that messaging, particularly at home, is quite important, to not demonize and make that, oh my gosh, you can't say fat, don't say fat, don't say fat, to not demonize that word, because that is just drilling home that message that because children who have a limited extent of understanding, fat's bad.
Yeah.
That's not, fat is bad. Mummy says fat is bad, and that's not something that I want to be.
Okay. So like as parents, we've, for the longest time been trying to teach our kids about other cultures and that we're not the only people in the world. And hopefully lately as well, we've really started to introduce, representation and, different race messaging to our kids. So, basically like body positivity needs to be another thing that's in the mix there. So we need to be buying our kids books with kids of all different shapes and sizes in them. The media that we consume is obviously really important in the same way. So Ellen, given that our kids probably will grow up in a world that, it hasn't changed enough yet, they will be looking at a lot of media, social media, movies, everything that, feeds them this message that this is how bodies look. How do we counteract that as parents?
Yeah, I think it's so important to include like a diverse range of different body shapes and sizes, and to have a diverse range of shapes and sizes in the media, and to try and build these unconscious ways that the child can deal and cope with these messages that are coming at them from all sides. With something called self-compassion is something that we're hearing a lot more about, and that's just being kind towards yourself in a way, and kind of thinking about what might you say to a friend who might have been struggling or said something like that to you. And it's to try and think about whose responsibility is it. The media needs to take responsibility for what they're putting out there as well, to protect children, and that there's diverse messages online, to kind of start that conversation, as you said, around body positivity, and to engage with that.
And I think everyone has a story about, maybe to stereotype, like an older relative who might have made a comment when they were growing up, or several.
Yeah.
Are we as parents allowed to kind of talk to these other relatives who might use language that we're not a big fan of? We are?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Well, it's kind of, what behaviour would you tolerate for your child?
Yeah.
Would you let them call them other names, and make comments? Now, I know it can be difficult, because sometimes the family conversations can be hard, but, in the same way, I often laugh if I'm working with a fussy eater and you're trying to get the grandparents to stop giving them crisps. You have to have the conversation, and I think it's absolutely fair to say, actually, don't talk about that. And I think it's not even necessarily a relative who's actually saying a child, isn't the right body shape or whatever that would be. It's more that even people are, you'll have adults going, well, I'm on this diet, and are you on this diet? And I have to say, in my house, if people start that, I'm going, we're just not going to talk about that here.
Okay. You
don't talk about that in front of children. And to be honest, even think how I know they're looking at me. But it's kind of like, how are you even talking, as you said, body compassion for yourself. Yeah. But I think absolutely you can say to relatives, look, let's not do that.
So the hard line is we just don't talk about weight in this house. I mean, that's fine.
Well, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think because the weight becomes into, as you said, it's a negative, and it's wrong and it's bad and it's all of that. Whereas no, we eat the foods that we eat, and we do the exercise that we do, and we don't have to put a judgment or a body size attached to that.
Yeah.
The language is so insidious, though. If you take the time to notice it, even in your own day-to-day life, particularly in adult environments and in office environments, and as women, it is absolutely constant. You cannot put something on your plate without someone, be it you or somebody else, making a comment about it, or making a comment about their own plate. If somebody has a salad, they're saying, oh, I'm being good, because I had such and such last night, or oh, I'm having chips with my lunch, or I'm having a big sandwich, oh, I'm going to go for a walk later to burn this off, things like that. And it's just absolutely constant. So it is hard to eliminate all forms of that language, but I think once you attune your ear to it, you do understand how completely pervasive it is, and it can obviously be a challenge to remove that completely from your home. But I definitely do agree that it's completely fine to ask people, look, please don't talk that way in front of my impressionable children, who they're just little sponges. They're picking up everything that you're putting down. It's very common now for children, very young children, to say things like, oh, I can't have that because that's naughty, or I'm being good, so I'm not allowed to have nice things, or mummy doesn't allow me to have nice things. Treats, yeah. Or, oh, we had pizza last night and then we went for a big walk so that we could burn it off, you know, things like that. Very small children are repeating these messages that we are giving to them. And I think in the Irish example, we have a real opportunity because, as Sarah said earlier, our parents' generation is one where you finished everything on your plate. We're only a couple of generations removed in this country from people starving.
Yeah.
My father comes from a very large family, 14 kids. They didn't have enough to eat.
Yeah.
So my grandmother, if she saw, you know, a fat grandchild coming through the door, she had like 35 grandchildren, delighted. She was chuffed to bits to see us all eating well,
it was
you know,
health,
thriving. Oh my gosh, a grand cut of a girl you were, you know, and that's where that comes from. And we're not that far removed from that. So we haven't had that long in this country where the diet culture is so like ingrained in us. But I hope maybe that will help us sort of do away with it maybe a little bit quicker.
So it's generational trauma, which is the phrase of we're all using at the moment. And also, I think it's about recognizing our own internal bias. You know, we say things all the time, mostly about ourselves, like it's internalized as well, you know, about, you know, bad comments about our stuff. So you're recognizing that I think it's important to recognize that we do have that bias. You know, we'd like to think of ourselves as really open-minded and everyone's wonderful, but when you drill down into it, you know, do I associate weight with health? Am I passing those messages on to my kids?
That's one of the things that I always recommend to people as one of the first things that they can do to start to sort of deprogram themselves from this is to stop making negative comments about yourself.
Yeah.
And again, I'll say it's an Irish thing. It's that Irish humility, the self-deprecation. If somebody gives you a compliment, oh, don't look disgusting today, whatever, you know. And if you do that first, if you tell yourself, okay, for 2 weeks, I'm not going to verbalize anything negative about myself. And then you will understand how quick the impulse is and how much actual body negativity you're putting out into the world, even though it's about yourself, because everybody around you absorbs those messages. And particularly from a fat activist perspective and from an inclusion perspective, if a slim person says something like that to me, like, oh my God, I feel disgusting. Like I've put on so much weight over lockdown. And I'm like, well, if you think you're disgusting, what must you think about me? I must be, you know, circus freak horrific levels in your mind. I know intellectually that that's not the case, but that is the message that you're putting out there. So if you can cut down in that negative self-talk, that's really a good first step in recognizing how much of it goes on around us and just eliminating one more source of negative body talk from the world.
And if us as grown-ass adults, if it's affecting us that badly, what I worry about is in the next couple of weeks at home, all of the comments that are going to be made about all of the food and how it's going to affect our kids because they are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was just thinking about that, kind of coming back to the messages that we're telling ourselves and how we're internalizing that, and the way we think about our body affects the way we treat our body, and then that's as a role model for your children, something that you're, you know, passing on to them. So I suppose, like, sometimes comments around the Christmas are going to be unavoidable. There's going to be some family members that are there that mightn't, you know, respect those boundaries that you've put in place, or it's kind of forgetful, like it might be on purpose, or that they say something like, we need to remember that they can be taken up in many different ways. And something that we kind of spoke about in the run up to Christmas is to try and anticipate how that might feel if someone does comment, especially for someone who's struggling with their relationship with food, to kind of anticipate what kind of comments or how you would feel. It's all about feelings when we think about eating disorders. It's coming back to how it might feel. And then on the day to kind of plan and prepare that you might have someone as an ally that's there to support you on the day, and that if you do kind of get into a panic or feel uncomfortable with what someone has said to you, that you can turn to them for support. And in a way, one thing that Harriet, my colleague, mentioned was that if there's someone there that you know you've kind of spoken about this with beforehand, to say like, oh, I'm concerned about like someone commenting and how that's going to make me feel, and then to come back to that on the day if the person does comment, and kind of make a glance towards your person and just be like, oh, we knew she was going to say it, there you go, like, and just kind of break that down a little bit, like, so that you're kind of conscious,
Preempting it
in a way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that can be really helpful in a way to kind of plan and how you're going to cope with those feelings that might come along with that.
So, I mean, Sarah, briefly, over the next couple of weeks when we're eating, what are the words we're going to all try to avoid at home?
Avoid, I'd rather go with let's really just enjoy this. And
Okay.
just, and I think you had a really good point about people saying, well, I have to burn off these calories. And one of the things I absolutely hate is when someone goes, well, these 2 biscuits is this much exercise and this. And I'm on Instagram and I had a post up a while ago and I was saying, well, actually 70% of the food you eat actually goes into just beating your heart, your brain, your lungs. So all this, I have to burn this much calories. Actually, it's sitting on your backside burns most of it, actually,
Right.
So I would say, we don't need to talk about restrictions. We don't need to talk about, I can't have this or I have to burn this off. Yes, go for a walk on Christmas Day, but that's because it clears your head or it helps your digestion or it's just lovely or it's a nice day. We don't have to go to make room for the dinner or to make room for dessert or because I had. And I think if we can just take that having to burn off food and to remember that we actually just need it. You need to eat. And I think just to shake that guilt out of it. And I also think sometimes when I see people though, it's permission to eat, which people don't have the rest of the year. We don't, and as you said, people are like, well, what's on your plate or what's on my plate? Or I had to go for this walk. And Christmas is like, oh, well, I can just eat everything. So then I find people eating stuff they don't even want because they have permission. But it's also in the back of their minds, well, I'm also going to starve myself on the 1st of January. And it's nearly
I'll pay for this.
Yeah, you don't have to force the food in. You can actually just enjoy it. And, I would look at it just as a pleasure and not this huge, again, drama with the whole thing.
Okay.
It's that restriction mentality almost that causes, restriction causes binge, and binge has a very kind of specific meaning within the eating disorder community, I know. But if you restrict yourself from, I can never eat chocolate, I can never eat crisps, the one thing you're just thinking about all day, every day is I want chocolate, I want crisps. When I used to work, I still work in an office, but when I worked in this one specific office, I worked with my manager who was a real chocolate fiend. So in order to pacify him, I would always have a drawer full of chocolate. And I was known in the office, the other women would come to me and be like, can I have some chocolate? I'm like, yeah, no problem. There you go, open the drawer. And they would always say, I don't know how you sit here with this beside you all day, every day, because if I had this, I would just eat it all. And I'm like, well, I know it's there. So I have permission to eat it anytime I want.
Okay.
And therefore, I don't want to. And I think that's one of the things that people fear with something like intuitive eating. If they give themselves permission to eat anything, they will eat everything. But again, bringing this back to this false notion of control, your body is in control of what it is telling you to eat and what it is telling you to enjoy. And okay, if you give yourself permission to eat whatever, even over Christmas, can you imagine eating the way we eat usually at Christmas? Every single weekend of the year, you'd be sick as a dog. Just, you wouldn't feel good in your body. So I definitely think there's almost this false notion of control of the size that we are is 100% based on the food that we put into our bodies, which is just completely false. We were all raised in homes where we all sat down and ate the same meal every day. And yet there are people in our families who are different sizes to us. I have a mum and a brother who are very slim. I have a dad who is bigger. All of the women on my father's side of the family have the exact same body shape as me. We're like cookie cutter versions of each other. And all of the people on my mother's side of the family are tall and slim. So there's a genetic component to this. And we cannot fool ourselves into thinking that we are in control 100% of how we look. And even more than that, if we really drill this down to the fundamental point of body positivity, how you look is actually the least important thing about you. We're talking all about, how can you feel good about how you look and how do we eat properly to X, Y, Z. How we look is the least important thing about us.
100%.
So we really need to detach ourselves from the notion that self-worth and image are connected in the first place.
So in some ways, the message, the take homes that I have from today is, being conscious and being aware and avoiding certain languages, but in general, just kind of really just letting go of the control that we're all trying to have on ourselves and on our kids. And I think that's going to be some really important messaging that for everyone, for all the parents watching, to take into Christmas and the Demon New Year, because there'll be a new year, but it'll just be the same old us, and that's fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We will be back after the Christmas break with more issues for Irish families. Until then, have a lovely Christmas and stay safe.